get this done, and I'm encouraged that it will get done before June. And then what we need to do is set up a system similar to what we have in the federal system. People can go out on supervised release. It works in the federal system. There's no reason it can't work in the state system. And it probably will take us another 6 months to a year to set up that structure to be able to have people supervised in a responsible way. But it's going to be much better than, as you said, having people sit in prison for months and months because they don't have $250 to make bail. And these are not folks who are, in general, a threat to the health or safety of the citizens in their neighborhoods. And it's not cost effective for us, but more important to me is you just are making people further and further depressed. The more you keep them in prison, knowing that the only reason they're there is because they made a mistake. And I think it was Matt who said everybody makes mistakes, and they do. Yep. And secondly, because they don't have the wherewithal, and so they're really in the equivalent of a debtor's prison. And that's not what we should be doing in our society, in my view.
Thank you. Governor, one of the real areas that we wrestle with, and as a former U.S. attorney, is that it's seemingly that the prosecutor's office wants to prosecute, the public defender's office wants to exonerate. And I think in Hudson County and in the next panels, I think we try to focus on making the individual whole and bringing a different quality of perspective. One of the real challenges that we have in Hudson County is the fact that somebody can face a charge in Hudson County, they face another charge in a different vicinage in Essex or in Gloucester or wherever, and it seems as if the criminal justice system sometimes works against the offender insofar as we try to put them on a path of rehabilitation, and then they're still cleaning up the wreckage of their past lives. How is it that the executive branch and the legislature and also the judiciary, three distinct branches, how can we try to reorient a system so that we have a clarity of focus on rehabilitating or focusing on the offender and making his or her whole life at least partially whole again?
Well, yeah, I think bail reform is part of the way you can do that, because I think what it's going to be able to do is to focus the judicial branch on there being two very distinct sets of offenders. You have offenders who have a long history of violence. It doesn't mean they can't be rehabilitated, but the presumption is going to be against them once they've been convicted in terms of that. They're going to have to show things over a period of time. But then you have this much larger class, fortunately for our state, of nonviolent offenders who the road from the beginning should be on rehabilitation. Now, if, in fact, you're not incarcerating those people, in fact, they're being able to be released, they have then the tools to be able to clean up that wreckage much more easily when you're outside than when you're in.
Yep.
And secondly, you're getting them back into society at a much quicker pace, which I think is going to give them the opportunity to be able to be successful again at a much quicker pace. I think the longer you spend time in those cells, especially when you know that you could be out but for a $250 payment, the frustration and the anger can grow. Now, hopefully they run into somebody like you who helps to get them focused even the time they're in there. But the fact is that not everybody does. And so we need to, I think the bail reform will help to focus the judicial branch on, okay, who are we really trying to protect here? And who are we trying to make sure that we incarcerate because their offenses merit that? And one thing that you said in the lead-in that I would take some issue with, I think, having worked for 7 years as the chief federal prosecutor in the state and working with a lot of prosecutors, I think if there's appropriate leadership at the top that says, our job is to do justice. It's not to win, it's to do justice. And I used to say to my prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office all the time, like, don't come to me and tell me how we're going to win, tell me how we're going to do the right thing. What's the right thing? And sometimes the right thing's walking away. Sometimes the right thing is working out a resolution beforehand. And I think that, the fact is that the leadership at the top of all these offices, whether it's the county prosecutor's office, the state attorney general, or the U.S. attorney's office, that it's incumbent upon them to provide a broader and more visionary leadership that does not define you purely by winning and losing, but also defines you by whether you're doing the right thing by each individual potential defendant or current defendant that comes before you. Because your responsibility as a public servant, as a prosecutor, is not just to win and incarcerate. You're the person, whether it's the individual AUSA or assistant prosecutor or a person in the AG's office. Your job is to represent the public in a way that will serve the public well, and the public includes the person who's sitting across the table from you as a potential defendant or a current defendant. So I find that most prosecutors that I've dealt with understand that, and if they get the appropriate support and leadership from the top, that they know they'll be backed for making those kind of decisions and not just taking the easy way out of pushing as hard as they can for a result. I think they'll do it because all these folks, I think, are in it not to get rich. They can get rich in a lot of other ways. They're in it because they really believe what they're doing is right.
Committed to it.
Yep.
You can clap. Sure. Just two more questions, Governor. One of the things that under your predecessor, Governor Corzine, wrestled with the question of closing prisons and pushing people into the possibility of treatment. And the reality is that to close institutions is a very difficult task, insofar as that you can move greater numbers of people into treatment, but they all don't come from one facility. Right. They come from throughout the system. And it seems almost as if that it's very, for lack of a better term, easy to incarcerate and to continue the status quo because it's what we've done for so long. But it's difficult, and you've done it in terms of increasing opportunities in drug court, moving people into treatment. But in terms of the systemic prison population, how do we move more aggressively, even than you've already done, to try to reverse the presumption of incarceration as opposed to treatment?
Well, there's a few elements to this, right? And you know this. It's not just about the presumption of incarceration. It's about politics. I mean, let's be honest about it. The politics of it is it's always easier if you're an elected official to say throw somebody in jail than not. It's always easier to do that. Secondly, we got a bunch of unionized people who work in these prisons who, if you eliminate them, you're going to be eliminating jobs. And there is, I am telling you, this is true, there is an institutional resistance to that. We're closing, this is something that's a little bit far field, but important for you to know, and I think related from an institutional perspective. I would assume that most people in this room do not know that New Jersey institutionalizes more developmentally disabled citizens than every state in the union other than Texas. New Jersey. Now, when I became governor, that's when I found that out, and I was stunned. Now, I'm closing 2 developmental centers. I'm in the process of closing 2 of them right now. And what happens is the forces of the people who represent the folks who work there bring political opposition to that because those are jobs that are lost. So politicians get into the spot where they're trying to say, well, do I want to anger these folks, or do I want to, close this place and create a better quality of life for people who aren't required to be institutionalized, whether you're talking about developmentally disabled citizens or whether you're talking about offenders. And so you can't forget the political element of that. And folks, it's not something that you talk about at cocktail parties, but it's the truth, everybody. And so when you try to do these things, when you try to close jails, prisons at the state level, when you try to close developmental centers at the state level, everybody says they're for that until they get the knock on the door from the represented interests who say, hey, wait a second, we're going to lose jobs over here. Well, you got to balance those two things. And the fact in my mind is that we have to balance it in favor of closing these places. And so I'm hopeful that as we integrate our program of rehabilitation, get fully phased in, and I've been talking to the Commissioner of Corrections about this, that we'll be in a position to close a state prison. And quite frankly, Governor, I'm not going to care less. The same way I don't care less about closing the developmental centers from the aspect of job loss. I can't, because my job is to worry about the quality of life for the people that I'm institutionalizing by my hand. Now, it may not be me personally, but it's under my authority as the governor that I'm sending a developmentally disabled person to an institution who might thrive more in a community-based setting. that I'm putting someone in an institution and not giving them the opportunity to be bailed or to go out on their own recognizance, in part because I'm trying to feed the beast. Well, we have to deal with that part of it too, and that's the part that gets more difficult from a political perspective. Yeah, everybody wants to throw some people in jail and say, yeah, I'm tough on crime, but we can walk away from that piece because we're showing it's not effective. But when both parties get together to actually say, you know what, we're going to stand up to these other interests that want to keep these places open merely for the jobs, to me, that's not a good enough justification for it. And so we're going to move towards doing that. And I think we're getting relatively close to the time where we will be able to do it. And I think once we get full phase-in of the drug program, I think you will see that happen.
That'd be tremendous. And I just want this audience to know that, and Ben Lopez and Oscar Villas are here, and Frank Mazza from Hudson County Reintegration. And we were able to move on the program, our women's program, in Hudson County Jail and 6 Echo, thanks to the Second Chance and Eric Holder. But the men's program was financed thanks to a decision by the Commissioner of Corrections, which was authorized by this governor, Chris Christie. So I just want to say thank you. And Michelle Alexander in the new Jim Crow laws talks about the reality of what's happening in terms of America. There are more African-American men incarcerated in the United States than there were South African blacks at the height of apartheid. And the fact that we have this grossly disproportionate number of people incarcerated and how far afield we've gotten as a nation. And you serve as chairman of the Republican Governors Association, and there's an interesting point in history. I think we all recognize that we're doing prisons badly, that this is a moral cancer in our society. Richard Viguerie wrote a powerful piece in the New York Times, and for the first time you see conservatives and liberals, evangelicals and Catholics and Jews and Muslims coming together to say universally we do something wrong. Is it possible for the Republican Governors Association?
Here we go.
Here it goes. There.
McGreevy almost got through the whole thing, didn't he? I don't love him. He almost got through the whole thing. God bless you, Jim. That's pretty good. But go ahead. What's the question?
Is it possible?
I just figured out I really am in Hudson County, aren't I? Here we go. Damn.
Exactly.
All right.
As Governor Burns says, he's going to be buried here so he can stay active and democratic.